So, I'm going to speak for a few minutes about labels. And labels are neither good or bad, and they can often be useful. And labels aren't just a word that we use on an emotional level, but they're the same word and the use can be looked at in the physical world, like putting labels on food that we've cooked. If we worked in a commercial kitchen, we put the sticker of the day that we've cooked the food on, and that's a very neutral but very true but very useful label. And on the emotional in the emotional world, it's also true that these labels can be stuck onto us, and we can put our own labels on ourselves. And often we categorise these labels as good or bad. It's good to be this, or it's bad to be that, and we really control ourselves, and we feel controlled by these labels. And I remember reading about a study where the teachers were told of exceptionally bright students in their class, and at the end of the year the children that were labelled exceptionally bright did a lot better, and it turns out these names were just randomly picked. So and I think we can all understand how that happens. When people get given these labels, there's a self-fulfilling prophecy, not only from within the individual with that label, but how other people perceive them, and when they believe this label, others, and they display behaviour according to that label, other people believe that narrative, and the same is true for negative labels. If people have been given a negative label because of anything, any prejudice, or even a negative label because of based on one incident, or the incident of a parent, it can affect a child. But and these can hold us back, and there's a lot of talk about overcoming these labels, but it's more for me at least, it's more complicated than that. And while it's good to abandon labels, and it's better to realise that they can be put to use. So one way that we can abandon labels is, like an example I have was, I was working as a gardener, and I'd see roughly around 20 people a week, and most were sort of pleasant and fairly neutral, some were very very overwhelmingly called me a wonderful gardener and brilliant, and this they couldn't speak highly enough. It was almost uncomfortable for me. And then other people would berate me and say I was useless and didn't know what I was doing, and it took me maybe 4 years. I'm maybe not the quickest of learners, but before I realised I was neither, and I just got exhausted by being puffed up with the positive compliments, and feeling down at the negative compliments, especially when you're going from place to place, and in a space of a 20-minute car journey you may have lost everything you've ever known about gardening, according to a customer, or gained some sort of, I don't know, almost divine knowledge of plants, and to go backwards and forwards with it back with all these comments was proved exhausting, and I dropped it. But then I realised later on that these labels can be put to good use, because if we're given a particular label and it affects us, it shows something about our own values. And if we get particularly annoyed about a label, or what's the worst thing you could possibly be called, and some people would think that being lazy or being stupid or something is the worst possible thing, and other people would be like, well, it's not great, but it doesn't elicit that overreaction, that massive internal reaction where we may be thinking about that time that we were called lazy or something, and we may ruminate on that over and over again for years, and they may have even wanted to insult us, but they only insulted us once, and yet we carry this insult maybe for years. So it's good to investigate when someone puts a label on us, why we reacted in such a positive or negative way, and realising that's where our values are, and then it can help with what some people call shadow work, where we look at the labels that we're given and look at our own sort of belief system, and we look at the parts that we're trying to hide. So the reason why we get so annoyed by being called late or unorganised is because that we're all late and unorganised to one degree or another, but the people who really get annoyed about it are the people who are denying that aspect of themselves, rather than someone saying, yeah, well, in that case I was a bit lazy, or this or that, and then we realise that we were holding on to this image of ourselves, and that was untrue, that and we need to realise that we're all of everything. We can all be hard working, and we can all be lazy, we can all be organised, we can all be disorganised, and it's having that balance, knowing that from time to time we can embrace any one of these characteristics, and realising that when we get annoyed about something, it gives us something to work on. Why do I get annoyed if I'm called unorganised? And often there can be quite some deep underlying meanings to that. But also we've got this inner critic in us who again rejects some labels, and again holds certain standards, and it's often thought that we should be silencing this inner critic or overcoming this inner critic, but some sort of confrontation and a win-loss sort of scenario put in, or at least some sort of adversarial relationship with this inner critic. But in my experience, this inner critic exists because we've understood that those are the values that protect us. So if we're worried about not being hard working enough, and our inner critic's telling us that we're not hard working, when really we understand that's an important characteristic to have. So it's that inner critic is actually protecting us. It's saying that you do need to be hard working, because it's important. If you don't work at what you do, then whether it's in anything, if we're unorganised, or if we're rude to people, and if we're critical about if we were rude to people, it's because we realise on a deep level that we should be critical, because it's in our own self-interest to moderate those behaviours that we were critical of. It's not beneficial to beat yourself up endlessly, and that's certainly not productive. But it's certainly productive to look at what the inner critic's telling us, and using that inner critic as a friend, and realising that inner critic only wants what's best for us, and it's a positive protective influence, and it might not seem like it at the time, but there is good with it, wise investigation for all of these things. So when I say labels are neither good or bad, I generally mean it. They're tools that we can use to investigate ourself and our own inner emotional world, and humans are emotional creatures that interpret the world through emotion more than anything else, and these labels for me are a good way for me to understand myself and the world around me and other people. So those are my thoughts for today. Hopefully something I said helped someone.